beginning to look like America's most recent Israeli led endeavor has become a bridge too far. And thus, it could be said that this is beginning to be the end of the American empire. Now, for many years, America's got involved with Israeli decided operations, Libya, Iraq, the list can go on. And now it seems like they finally got their way in getting America to launch a proper strike on Iran, something that they've been itching for the last 20 years. However, as we're all aware now, the consequences of such have not gone as planned. And the damaging consequence could be the end of the American empire. Now, that's obviously quite a hyperbolic claim, a large prediction, but there's a lot of validity to it. If you look around the world and the consequences of this recent strike in Iran, there are a lot of signs that this could really be the collapse of America. This was their bridge too far. This was kind of the embodiment of late stage imperial hubris. If you look at a lot of other kind of indicators of imperial decline, particularly pertaining to stuff like secular cycles, something Peter Turchin talks a lot about, or any of the other kind of cyclical historians, it would track that America kind of is at that stage, depending, of course, when we decide to start just to the definition of American imperialism. Now, we're going to look quickly at how the current US decision to start bombing Iran, the foolish decision, has weakened their imperial prestige in the Middle East, East Asia, and Europe, and also the potential pivot that they may now follow to do, or any of the other kind of related topics to it. It's going to be a long one, so strap in, grab a drink, grab some snacks, and let's discuss why this fatal decision to attack Iran could begin the demise of the American empire. Now, we'll start in the Gulf, and who better to talk about the Gulf than a Muslim? Go
Assalamu
ahead,
alaikum,
Islam.
Habibi. Thank you very much. I start talking about golf now. No, but generally, another very quick thing I want to iterate is that if you've been living under a rock or you've been lied to your entire life and you've never actually known the truth, Israel and America, right, are basically buddy buddies, right? America does everything in the Middle East for the sake of Israel. At least it did mostly. And although many things that America did for the sake of Israel never really benefited America, I would personally argue, from a realist perspective, that things like Iraq, maybe some things they did in Syria and things they did in Libya, and of course, a lot of the things they did with Israel when it comes to backing them up against their wars against the Arabs, did slightly benefit America. Primarily for the fact that America was able to either maintain or establish or put pressure on states to either, like I said, keep, maintain, or establish the petrodollar, which is a topic for another discussion in a video talking about US dollar hegemony. But the point is that many wars that America previously waged for the sake of Israel also slightly benefited America. This is where I slightly disagree with John Mearsheimer. However, like Christian Bro said, they've gone too far now. And this is truly a war that doesn't benefit America at all, and in fact, may even be the case of unraveling the American empire, global American empire. Now, when it comes to the Gulf states, right, the primary 3 points that I want to mention is, number one, that the Gulf states are feeling like they're being neglected in some capacity. Now, this is important for one reason and one reason only, which is that the Gulf states, when they established the petrodollar in 1976, I want to say, something along those lines. It's the 1970s.
I think so, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and what basically happened was that they said to America, look, we want to guarantee the safety of our oil exports, but also we want to guarantee our power. We want to guarantee our power as a royal family. In this case, we'll go with the example of the Saudis, right? The Saudi royal family, the Sauds, said, we want to maintain our power, but we also want to maintain our economic interests. So you want to protect our oil exports. So America was like, cool, I'm going to set up bases. These bases are going to make sure that your oil exports are going to be chilling, so your oil exports, but also that you can now, maintain your own power. You can establish yourself as the monarchy. And so what ended up happening is that the Sauds were like, yeah, this is fantastic. We're happy doing this. However, the first thing started breaking in the chain here, which is that they're not being protected. They had their military bases bombed, right? The American military bases in this case, which obviously Saudi Arabia never had genuine military bases. If you're new to Arab history, like Arabs were basically just tribes. That's it. Just big tribal families, right? And the Sauds just ended up coming on top because of this agreement that they had with the US. But also because now that the US is seeing these oil refineries, it's seeing these oil export hubs, and it's seeing these military bases be bombed, they're doing nothing about it. The only thing they care about is their little baby Israel, right? Their little baby, the one they care most about, right? It's like the third child, right? The youngest child of America. They neglect the first and second child for the sake of the third. And so in this case, and this is the first point, which is that they can feel the one-way and disingenuous relationship that they have with America. If America is seen as untrustworthy, then it might not be the Saudi royal family, and it might not be Saudi Arabia, which is obviously the biggest one in this case and the most important one if a decision was going to be made by the Arab states to disconnect either from the petrodollar or to, cool a bit their American relationships. The others definitely will, right? For example, the UAE. The UAE knows it can now start standing on its own 2 feet, right? Because it doesn't just have oil exports. It has a booming real estate. Of course, that's been detrimented by the war. But it has a booming real estate economy. And it also has its interest in Sudan when it comes to gold, right? And so the UAE can stand on its own 2 feet. Saudi Arabia can't. And this leads me to my second point, which is that the Gulf states are now realizing that the US relationship they have doesn't benefit them as much as they thought it did economically. They've established their power for long enough. They've maintained their legitimacy. Their citizens are now used to them. They're familiar with them. If you know anything about psychology, you know the reason we love people, the reason we care about people, is because we become familiar with them. There's a reason when you meet somebody for the 10th time, you like them more than the first time. It's genuinely because you are just more familiar with them. The more frequently you see somebody, the more you like them. And so what ends up happening is that, what I assume will end up happening, and this isn't like a big prediction that I think is going to happen like today or tomorrow or in the long run. It's just, just a prediction based on the current affairs, is that the Gulf states will start to emphasize their own independence. And that will primarily be economic at the start. I don't think they'll disconnect from the petrodollar yet. I don't think they'll do anything as drastic as that because that will collapse the US dollar. But they'll start, improving certain industries. They'll start decreasing their spending on this. They might even start increasing their military spending, whatever they would do, right? The point is that they would try to gain some sort of independence from America. And now my third and final point in regard to the Gulf states. So the first point was that they feel that they're being neglected by America when it comes to military protection. The second one is they feel like the economic relationship they have with America may not benefit them as much. The third one is that they're starting to realize that the situation in, let's say, the Arab Peninsula and in the Middle East is one that is centered around Israel. They've realized that they're not as big in the game as they thought they are, or they were. And so this entire time, especially the Sauds in Saudi Arabia, thought that they ended up representing the Sunni Muslims, and that this was a significant thing. When in reality, in realpolitik, in real politics, in realism, and in international affairs, if you do not have your own military, if you cannot stand on your own 2 feet and fight your own wars, you don't have a chance for legitimacy. And the Gulf states and the Arab states are starting to realize this, that they are simply puppets of America, and that they cannot continue this way, because if Iran one day decides to invade them, they can do nothing other than ask for help. Now, this was fine in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, because it wasn't in their territory. Oh, Saddam Hussein is scaring us, Our revenues of oil are decreasing because Saddam Hussein is selling his oil in euros. Do something about it, America. And America, of course, was like, yeah, I'm going to do something about it because it's pissing us off. But because they can do nothing themselves, what ends up happening is that they weaken for the sake of Israel. And I genuinely believe there's going to be a rising consciousness in the Arab states where they go, hold on a second, Habibi, wallahi, Israel is number one for America. I'm number 2. And I don't think they're going to be happy with that. In fact, they're not even number 2, they're like number 15. Right? If there wasn't for their oil, America wouldn't give 2 craps about them. And of course, that's normal. But my point is that if the only legitimacy they have with America is that they can protect their oil, and that's not enough, what are they going to do but gain their own independence? What are they going to do but try and break away? So that's my rambling over when it comes to the Gulf states. Is there anything you want to add, Christian?
Yeah, I mean, I think the immediacy that needs to be first addressed is, of course, the fact that if America has as it's done, diverted all its anti-missile defenses towards Israel, there is nothing currently stopping Iran, if they were provoked even further, let's say, going all out and absolutely destroying Gulf production of oil and gas. because the missile defenses have been relocated towards Israel. And Iran, let's not forget the Iranian missile stockpile runs deep. They are not exhausting it as it stands. They have the potential to launch more and more. And with impunity, as it stands, could absolutely obliterate the Gulf oil production. And that would, I don't really think I need to state how negative an impact that would have on the Gulf states. And as you said, this will surely pivot these states either towards creating more of their own military and trying to rely less on the US, or simply pivoting towards China and Russia. Let's not forget Saudi Arabia and UAE have attended a lot of the BRICS summits. Now, I don't put too much stake in the kind of the presence and prestige of BRICS as an organization, but it does at least kind of indicate a willingness to divert somewhat away from the American path. And with the recent events, what really is there to stop Saudi Arabia going, okay, hang on, America hasn't protected us. Why not? Why aren't we pivoting our security interests towards China? Because no one messes with the Chinese, right? There's a reason China Airlines will still fly over the region as it stands, because no one messes with China currently. So what's stopping these states pivoting away from the US? Now, the other point I think that should be also touched upon in the Middle East is the fact that the favorability this intervention has actually given to Iran with the shutting off of Hormuz. With the shutting off Hormuz, they actually hold the cards now. Iran can and should, from their own kind of geopolitical considerations, start making maximalist gains for a ceasefire. This isn't like the last couple of interventions in Iran where, both sides are kind of getting a bit weary. They'll tap out without having to cede much. In this case, Iran kind of holds the cards. They're blocking Hormuz. It's not looking like America can really do much about that without putting boots on the ground. They're probably not going to put boots on the ground because that'd be even more disastrous than the situation they're in currently. So seriously, what is stopping Iran making claims in this region? Perhaps it may be, sanctions being lifted on them, meaning they can now put more money into their proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis. What's stopping them kind of giving the upper hand now in the Middle East from the treaty that could emerge from this conflict? So the reason America is kind of lost to the Middle East is essentially Iran now is actually in a more favorable position because of the attacks, because they've kind of finally kind of done something. When I say done something, they've reacted. They shut the Hormuz. They've now shown to the world, A, we can defend against US strikes, and B, we can actually disrupt the US system. And secondly, America is going to lose its grip because they've been shown to betray their allies. It's been shown that their ally truly is and will always be Israel. It won't be the Habibis down in the Middle East. It will always be Israel.
100%. There's two things I quickly want to add as well, Christian, bro. The first one is that my name is not Edward Said, right? But however, you have to remember that the borders in the Arab states are just lines in the sand. They literally are just lines in the sand. The most protection and the most legitimacy they have of their borders is in their airports, because they can control who flies in and who flies out. But if you're trying to travel from, I don't know, Saudi Arabia to any of the neighboring countries, even to Yemen, it's very easy for you to get across. Because again, on a map, you can't really delineate between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. The reason this is important is that Iran can very easily start having its clients or its vassals and their little military operations that they fund with different what they call guerrillas. They could start pushing boundaries. They can start pushing into these territories. And what's there to stop them? America, unfortunately, and this isn't out of ignorance necessarily, I think this is just out of ignoring the reality slightly, is in the fact that they treat the Arab states as these hard-bordered countries that aren't fluid. A bit like in Europe, or a bit like in America, right? In North and South America. However, the reality is that Iran holds so much leverage in this case that there's nothing that is stopping them from decreasing the territorial legitimacy of a lot of these Arab states. There is generally nothing that stops them. But this also leads me to my caveat to all the points that I've made here, which is one thing that will maintain strongly the Arab states and their relationship with America is that they can keep their power. The royal families can keep their power. I'm specifically pointing out the royal family of Saudi Arabia, the Sauds. Because the Sauds, and I'm not trying to get myself assassinated here, right? They aren't the legitimate rulers of Saudi Arabia. There is nothing, for example, that ties them to the land, right, more than a lot of the other tribes. In fact, if we were to look at Islamic history, for example, they're not the most legitimate rulers that could be in place. But what maintains their rule is the fact that they're the ones who held a monopoly over oil. And they're the ones who were able to get American and European investment into the oil, and then favor American investment, and then have the petrodollar agreement. That's what maintains their power at the end of the day. You can disagree with me, but if I was to remove the petrodollar, if I was to remove the oil that they found, would they be in power? No. And so this is the key point, is that as long as their power can be maintained, I generally think they are willing to have just the shit bombed out of their country as long as they can stay in power. Now, I know that's very black-pilling, but it's, in my opinion, it's the truth. Because unlike Western states, they're democratic, and that the people have a voice in this perspective. As long as that the people aren't too pissed off that they have some sort of revolt, which, by the way, is not in nature of the Arabs. Do not let the Arab Spring fool you. Do not let the Arab Spring fool you. The Arab Spring, we can say, was a radical shift from traditional Arab behavior. And as you'll see, it was very much, right, it kind of blown up by the youths on Facebook and different social medias. And it was a very liberal movement as it was perceived by many Arabs, right? Like, for example, my family personally in Tunisia didn't support it as much. They were fed up with Ben Ali, right? However, they didn't support it as much. Why? Because it's not in the nature of Arabs to revolt against their leaders. It's a taboo thing to do. As long as Saudi Arabia and the royal family, by the way, this goes for all the other Gulf states as well, as long as they can maintain their power in their countries and that they can maintain as much territorial gain and legitimacy, they will not be bothered that much. Yes, they might lose a lot of money, but they are sitting on piles and piles of cash, and these countries don't actually have a huge population. And the population is actually quite wealthy for the most part. And so that's my one caveat, Christian bro, is that they're going to be very resilient as long as their domestic power is maintained. I think if that gets threatened, then they'll shift maybe.
As to my point, it doesn't matter if America or China is securing that. If they're getting 100%. Their power back, that's where they'll go.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think we've yapped enough about the Middle East.
Sorry,
there is, of course, another land.
Oh, by the way, here's the Saudis. Sorry to cut you off, Christian, bro. Here's the Saudis, and then the UAE getting bombed. There you go.
Yeah, there is, of course, another land, Japan.
Now,
if we pivot over to East Asia. Now, US foreign policy and empire maintenance should really have been focused on East Asia. You know, the Middle East is, of course, an important region, but if we're being honest, all imperial US efforts should have been focused on suppressing China, not on attacking Iran, not on defending Israel. It should purely have been China. China's the biggest threat to the US empire, right? If you look at any logical empire, you know, the Greeks, it was always with Persia back then. The Romans, again, with Persia. The great European empires, the Ottomans when they became a threat, Russia when it became a threat. You see what I mean? Logical imperial policy should always be focused primarily on stopping the emergent other global power, China. Because again, these states like Iran, that America's bogged down in now, are supported by China. Now, they haven't done this. Now, there is still, of course, some strength that the US has in the West Pacific and Asia surrounding China, but that could now also be under threat. Now, we've already seen it could be under threat specifically because it's actually shown that there's a strain in the American empire, right? Now, you wouldn't imagine, and I would certainly have not imagined, that to defend Israel, America would have to take missiles out of Korea to do so. Turns out they actually do. Now, despite all the money that America spends on its military, I think the nature of warfare changing towards allowing drone warfare and more cheap mass-produced missiles shows that even with its huge amount of spending, it still can't fully maintain protection globally, which is interesting. And it also shows, again, this pivot. They've pivoted away from South Korea and Japan, you know, two very, very powerful economies. If we're talking about allies that actually do something for America, Japan and South Korea do something for America if you look at imports and debt that they hold of American assets, right? And just security broadly. And yet they had to divert to protect Israel. Now, this shows something big. It shows something big because it shows that America is first willing to abandon East Asia for Israel. And again, it shows that they do not actually hold the resources to protect these places if there were to be some kind of multi-pronged attack. You know, look, there's always talk of China invading Taiwan. Now, personally, I wouldn't believe that China will invade Taiwan in the near future. I don't think it's as strategically resourceful as they think. But one thing they could pivot towards is getting it more in the Chinese sphere of influence. There's nothing stopping, they don't have to physically lose millions of men invading it, completely disrupting the global trade to just get Taiwan a bit more aligned with Chinese policy, which they certainly can do if it looks as if America is leaving the region.
Yeah. The one thing I'll add as well when it comes to this specifically is that we have to always analyze geopolitics from a Westphalian perspective. Now, I won't teach a history lesson in terms of the Westphalian states, but a primary principle of the Westphalian system in international relations is that there's supposed to be a maintenance of power. You cannot allow one state to get too strong, right? So every state that is the strongest, basically, will at some point be brought down. It'll be brought down a peg, right? And every emerging state is going to be attacked by the current, if you will, most powerful. However, America hasn't done this, which is completely illogical, because the more it focuses on Israel, propping up Israel, the more we can argue that it props itself down. This is the US we're talking about. But it's not just that it props itself down. What it allows is space. What it allows is momentum for China to continue propping itself up. This is the key thing. As a state, you're supposed to prop yourself up unless you are actively propping another small state up to attack the one that is emerging, if you see what I'm saying. But Israel's not going to do anything against China, right? And so this is a really strange decision from the US, because in 2008, Obama mentioned having the shift to the east, right? Shifting his international policies towards the east, towards China. However, now we see it deriving back to the Middle East. And what this does is that allows China to kind of have free roam in terms of what they want to do. They can roam around freely and do what they need to do and enact a lot more stronger policies, because they can see that the US is just bark and no bite. Why? Because they care about their baby Israel, right? So that's my point as well, China, Christian, bro.
Yeah, I mean, and also let's not look. I don't want to make predictions that I don't think the results will be as dramatic as we're seeing in the Middle East. Like, for no reason do I believe that North Korea would invade South Korea. I don't think China personally would let them. I also don't think we're going to see Japan fully ever go full Chinese sphere of influence. But certainly it does. I think this shift away from Asia is symbolic in the fact that it just shows a kind of overextension of America. What this war has proven is America simply cannot be a Asian, Middle East, and Europe, and we will get onto Europe shortly. It cannot maintain itself in three regions at the same time. It's just not possible for them. Now, of course, under sensible policy, it should have been Asia, but quite simply, they're unable to do Asia whilst having the kind of, the huge ulcer that is Israel on their tongue. It's just impossible for them, and this is proving it right now. So no, don't immediately think that we're going to see, China invading Taiwan and North Korea immediately striking South Korea. They're obviously posturing for that sort of stuff. It's obviously what you should do in this situation. They're not going to fully invade, but what we could see is perhaps, de-escalation of US military bases in these areas, Chinese allowed to grow even more, and China perhaps even, securing more kind of peripheral states like a Vietnam, an Indonesia, a Malaysia, etc., more into their sphere of influence.
Yeah.
Now we'll shift to Europe.
Let's go. Europe.
Now, Europe. Now, the big strain with Europe, of course, is that, as we know, we've seen Russia bogged down in the war of Ukraine. And this is actually providing like a potential exit route for them. Now, of course, Russia holds enormous reserves of oil and gas. It's previously what has fueled our homes for years, put the fuel in our cars, is Russian oil and gas. Now, we've stopped buying that, stupidly, in my opinion, to support the Ukrainians in their effort to fight off the Russians. And we could kind of sustain this because at least there was oil we could buy from the Middle East. Now that is no longer the case, however. We can't supplement the energy we've lost to Russia with Middle Eastern oil and gas. Renewables, I mean, I'm not completely against them. I think nuclear is a good alternative. But let's face it, renewables aren't enough to supply the European energy market. So, what is to happen? If this Iran situation continues, and let's be honest, it very much can continue, there is nothing stopping Iran fully closing the strait as long as they can, we're going to have to somehow find energy that isn't Russian, isn't Eastern. That's not possible. So the only logical solution might have to be to start buying Russian oil. And that will obviously have to come with a de-escalation of our support for Ukraine. Now, while this means a shift to the end of American imperialism in Europe, there's two factors. One, of course, America would want Ukraine to win that war. If Russia becomes, gains back leverage, manages to get a victory out of this conflict, that's obviously a dent on US prestige. It shows that they're unable to contain the kind of post 1991 dream of, stable, static European borders. It shows that the borders of Europe can change. It shows that there is a power in Europe that can exert its will without American intervention, and that would be Russia. The other big shift, of course, pardon me, would be that the Europeans would now be back in line with Russia. They would now be buying Russian oil and gas again, and might even begin pivoting to perhaps create a more European centralized system. I mean, we've already seen all the European states reject supporting America. Again, it shows that there's an illogicalness to their strategy that the Europeans are finally aware enough to not go along with. So not only has this conflict damaged them in the Middle East, it's now damaged them in Europe. Because it's going to have to. And I mean, look, we have very stupid leaders in Europe, very emotionally driven leaders that are very irrational. But surely if the Hormuz closure drags on, they will have to start buying Russian oil and gas back again. There will have to be some kind of olive leaf branch given to the Russians to try and de-escalate this. I don't know what you think about Europe, man.
Yeah, I agree with you, Christian, bro. I mean, you're out of the two of us, you're the person who's a lot more knowledgeable when it comes to the European case, but also when it comes to understanding the dynamics between Europe and Russia, because obviously there's a long history with that as well. I think if there was a through line between all of this as well, and that maintains our main point with Europe, is that every US ally, bar Israel, is seeing their relationship with the US be a one-way relationship. But specifically, they're also seeing that the US isn't as prestigious, as it was before. I believe that a lot of the victories that the US had during the Cold War, now I'm not a constructivist, I'm not here to talk just about identities and beliefs and things like that, but they did have a sense of invulnerability. And I think the Vietnam War broke that, but since the 90s, I feel like their interventions in the Middle East also broke their sense of invulnerability. They always tried to maintain, after that, their relationship with Israel to be as golden as possible. But at the same time, what that did was that made them a bit hesitant to truly, put themselves forward and put their full strength and, go full throttle on their other interventions or their other campaigns, if you will. And there's kind of a lag between perception of a state and a state's own reality. And I think the lag is catching up now, where US allies are realizing the US is generally not as great as we thought it was. The US has known this for ages now. They know this internally. But the allies are realizing that they're going to have to play the game of politics, specifically geopolitics and international relations, back to realism. They have to stop playing in this liberal manner of everything has to be cooperative on the terms of, we're a democracy. We all believe these neoliberal ideals. It's going to have to go back with balance of power. We're going to have to balance our power. We're going to have to maintain our own status. We're going to have to maintain our own military. We're going to have to be independent. And if we do have cooperation, it's going to be mutually beneficial, not beneficial in one way. And so that's the main point I wanted to make in Europe, Christian, bro. But it kind of ties to everything else as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And as a future, I hope. Honestly, I've had enough of us being an American vassal. I think it's done far more harm than we even realize in terms of like the cultural poisoning. We've made videos on this similar if you want to check them out. But yeah, I think if we can pivot away to being more deterministic, non-US reliant states that adopt rational policy, that could be a good thing. And if it means getting America out of Europe, I'm happy for that. But taking the more objective stance that we're trying to adopt throughout this video, yes. The fact that the Europe didn't go along with the first blocking the Hormuz says something already. It says that, again, we're finally kind of not just answering to America's call willy-nilly. There is now beginning to be some kind of critical approach to it. I think it helps as well that the population is also of Europe is so vehemently anti-Israeli. I think that's done some kind of awakening. Let's just see if they're rational enough now, however, to approach Russia, and if we can kind of see an end to the war in Ukraine. Now, the next thing we want to talk about finally is Latin America. Now, one thing that should be stated is not every single American intervention abroad or act of foreign policy has to be seen as bad. I do really want to emphasize that we're not kind of complete third worldists, complete anti-Americanists in principle. Now, in my opinion, I don't actually see much wrong with, America intervening as they have done in Latin America. Controversial as it may be, I personally think if you're going to removing someone like Maduro from Venezuela isn't as, ludicrous as some people may make out. Sure, there might be some kind of Zionist links to the operation, but first and foremost, if you have an opposing power near your borders, I don't really see the harm in getting rid of someone like that, especially if it can be done as swiftly as they had done. Same could be said for Cuba, despite how kind of cocky the American regime is about it. I do sort of agree with that approach to foreign policy. So perhaps you may see, with the result of America no longer being able to maintain its prestige, directing more of their foreign policy efforts towards Latin America. The big issues in Latin America are namely, the Mexican cartels on the US border. That could be something that they get bogged down in later on. And to be honest, it probably would be sensible to try and do something about it, as hard as it may be. We'll see. Cuba is one nation they probably should be trying to get rid of. They should be trying to get rid of Venezuela. And as much as they are kind of dislikable pro-Israeli type of people, if you can have allies like Milei in Argentina, it's not a silly policy to go forward. Latin America might actually have to be what America reverts back to, which ironically, and it seems weird to say, would be America being America first in some kind of sort of way. They'll probably never stop their support of Israel, so we won't get the true dream of American foreign policy. But going forward, it might be seen that they'll be doing more of an emphasis in Latin America. Now we're on the consequences of all this thing. There should be some things we need to bring up. This has, of course, been part of the Trump regime. America is a democracy, and there will be a president that comes in after Trump. Now, they probably won't be able to, completely repair all the damage done by this intervention in Iran, but it might be able to at least save some prestige. So if we do get a new president, there might be some, reinstation of respect coordinated, especially if it's a kind of left wing type of American politician. Especially as well, given that it doesn't seem like there is full regime backing of this war. There's been CIA leaks on American, talks on this conflict. I'd say they're gearing up to throw the people that did this under the bus. However, even if that is done and there is an attempt to clean up the mess, I think the consequences have been laid bare. Now, we'll only fully know once we get a settlement to the Iran and America situation and we see how the nations of Asia and the nations of Europe react to this. But as it stands, even with a new regime coming in, it could be seen that we have seen at least the start of the demise of the American empire.
The start of the demise, I think. I know we were so dramatic at the start of this, Christian, bro. I hope people don't feel cheated or that we clickbaited them. America's going to get shaken up, I believe, with their global American empire. But whoever maintains will be fortified. And we hope that the ones that get maintained end up being things that benefit America, the American citizens themselves. That could be the pivot to South America. That could be the pivot to the East. We dream that America would completely just ignore Israel and should let Israel be a normal state, right? I'm not for necessarily the complete destruction of Israel, although I believe they will be reprimanded. I believe, I'm a Muslim, so there's certain things that we believe are prophesied the same way the Jews believe there are prophecies and the same way the Christians believe there are prophecies around Israel and Jerusalem. But the point remains is that if we were to look at it from a completely realist and, just a value-free analysis,
As we should.
exactly as we should, is that if Israel is to continue being a state, then it should be treated as a normal state. And that also means that America would probably benefit more. And in fact, I believe Israel will benefit more if America stopped intervening so much and stopped trying to push its agenda, or I should say the Zionist agenda, across the Middle East. And from this, I can say the main consequence of the war with Iran is that America and its allies are being shaken. And then we might see some allies maybe not drop off, but the buildings will have some cracks. However, the buildings that do remain and that feel like they want to strengthen their ties with America will be heavily, and I mean heavily, strengthened. As Machiavelli says, whenever you have a situation that shakes up your power, you're going to see who your allies are and who your friends are. Your friends will be stronger with you, and your friends will be friendlier with you, and your enemies may be more, abhorrent against you. But that is the nature of power, right? Regardless, we hope you've enjoyed the video. Any last thoughts, Christian, bro?
Yeah, I think I'd add one last point in that if we're going to make a historical comparison to the American Empire, I've seen it being stated that this is kind of like their Suez Crisis for the British Empire. I wouldn't put it at that point. I'd say this is more of a bulwark, an emerging crack within the British Empire, an emerging kind of dent in prestige. We're not at the late stage end of the British Empire, but we are. It's on the horizon. It's shown that there isn't this kind of invincibility to the empire. It's showing that they can't, truly just fight everyone at once. And it's showing that America might eventually begin to crack sooner than we might have anticipated. But yeah, I think we've talked long enough. Thank you very much if you've listened all the way through. You can do all the YouTube stuff, Muslim bro.
Yeah, don't forget to like, subscribe. We'd love you for it. Obviously, me and Christian Bro aren't going to become speculative and kind of talk about what we predict, but we would generally love to hear your thoughts about your predictions. Maybe you completely disagree with us and you think these two are absolute idiots. Trust me, like I mentioned earlier, if you watch us more than once, you'll start loving us, right? You'll become familiar with us. We'll start liking each other. But please do leave a comment. We want to hear your thoughts. We do read the comments. We find them very, very interesting because we find that most people who watch these videos are actually quite smart. So even if you've never commented before, please feel free to. But God bless you all. Take care of yourself. Thank you very, very much for watching. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.